Stay with us until the end of this incredible journey, where you'll discover how a simple well reveals the endless power of compassion, and how it can transform your life forever. The sun hung heavy in the sky, a burning presence that seemed to scorch everything it touched. The desert of Judea stretched out before them, endless and unyielding. Jesus and his disciples had been walking for hours, their footsteps crunching on the dry earth, their throats parched from the relentless heat. Even the birds seemed to have given up singing, hiding in the shade of the sparse trees that dotted the horizon. The land was barren, a reflection of the drought that had ravaged the region for months. Simon Peter, ever the one to voice his thoughts, wiped the sweat from his brow and looked up at the sun with an exasperated sigh. "Master," he called out, his voice tinged with frustration, "how much further do we have to go? The land is parched and the water from the wells is almost gone. If we don't find a source soon, we will be lost in this heat." Jesus, however, walked ahead with a quiet assurance, his face illuminated not by the harsh light of the sun, but by an inner peace that seemed to transcend the physical world. His eyes, always filled with compassion, scanned the landscape, and for a moment, it almost seemed as if the land itself softened in his presence. "Peter," Jesus said softly without turning, "trust that the Lord will provide what we need. The earth may be dry, but it is not the earth that sustains us. It is the love and compassion that flow through us, which is as endless as the rivers of heaven." Peter, though unsure, could not argue with the calm authority in Jesus' voice. He nodded, though doubt still lingered in his mind. They walked on, in silence this time, each step an effort to trust, to believe in the Master's words, even when the world around them seemed so desolate. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached a village nestled at the foot of a hill. The sight of green trees and a cool breeze brought a sense of relief. The village stood in stark contrast to the dry land they had left behind. A well stood at the village's edge, its stone walls weathered by years of use but still strong, still whole. Jesus stopped and gazed at the well, his face thoughtful. His disciples too stopped beside him, feeling a sense of hope rising in their chests. "Master," John said, his voice full of wonder, "how is it that this well still has water? Everything else around here is dry, but the well looks full. It's like a miracle." Jesus smiled, a gentle, knowing smile, and then motioned for his disciples to sit. "This is no ordinary well," he said, his voice rich with the promise of a deeper lesson. "Let me tell you a story." Jesus' words hung in the air like the softest of whispers. His disciples sat down, eager to hear what he would say next. It was clear that Jesus had more to teach them, as he always did, not just through his actions, but through the stories that revealed the truths of the world around them. The warmth of the sun seemed to fade as he began. "Once," Jesus began, his voice steady and calm, "there was a great kingdom that prospered in every way. The land was fertile, the people were healthy, and the rivers flowed freely. But as often happens, a great famine struck. The rain stopped and the crops failed. The rivers dried up and even the wells ran dry. The people became desperate. They traveled for days, sometimes weeks, searching for a source of water, but wherever they went, all they found were empty wells and barren fields." The disciples listened closely, drawn into the story. They could feel the weight of the kingdom's desperation, the thirst that gripped the people, and the hopelessness that had begun to seep into their hearts. One day the king sent his soldiers to search for any village that still had water. They searched far and wide until they came to a small, quiet village in the hills, where an old man lived. The old man tended to a well that had never run dry. No matter how severe the drought, this well remained full, always brimming with cool, refreshing water. "How could this be?" Thomas asked, already intrigued. "How could one well survive the drought when so many others had failed?" Jesus gave a soft laugh, his eyes twinkling with the knowledge of the answer. The old man knew something that the others did not. He knew that this well was not just a source of physical water. It was a well of compassion, a well that had been tended not by the hand alone, but by the heart. The disciples were silent, the gravity of the story settling upon them. Jesus continued, drawing them further into the tale. The soldiers, after hearing rumors of the miraculous well, made their way to the old man's village. They were weak, their clothes torn from the journey, their faces gaunt from thirst. They approached the well, their eyes wide with disbelief as they saw it was full of water, untouched by the ravages of the drought. The old man, whose hair was silver and whose face was lined with years of wisdom, smiled as the soldiers approached. "You are thirsty," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Drink, my friends. But remember this water, like all that is good, is not just for you. It must be shared or it will run dry." The soldiers, too thirsty to think, knelt by the well and drank deeply, savoring the cool water that soothed their cracked lips and dry throats. But one of the soldiers, still confused, looked up from the water and asked, "How is it that your well has not run dry like the others?" The old man smiled, his eyes gleaming with the light of understanding. "This well," he said, "is not like the others. It is sustained not by the earth, but by the love and compassion of those who give. The more you give, the more the well will fill. Just as this well never runs dry, so too can compassion in your hearts flow endlessly if you share it." The soldiers were stunned, for they had never considered that something as simple as kindness could be the key to survival. They had been taught to take what they needed, to hoard what they could, but the old man's words rang with a truth that felt almost otherworldly. Over the next few days, the soldiers stayed in the village, learning the old man's ways. They watched how the villagers, despite their poverty, shared everything they had. When one person had food, they shared it with those who had none. When one person had water, they shared it with others. The villagers seemed to live in harmony, their lives bound together by a common thread of generosity and love. As the soldiers observed, they began to understand the old man's wisdom. The well, it seemed, was not just a source of water, it was a reflection of the village's heart. Compassion flowed from one person to the next, and as it did, the well never ran dry. One soldier, moved by what he saw, approached the old man and asked, "How can we repay you for your kindness?" The old man chuckled, shaking his head. "There is no repayment needed, my friend. You do not repay kindness. You share it. You pass it on." Back at the well, Jesus finished the story, and his disciples were silent, their thoughts heavy with the weight of the lesson. Peter, always the practical one, was the first to speak. "Master," he began, his brow furrowed with concern, "if we give and give, what happens when we have nothing left? Won't we run dry too?" The question hung in the air, and Jesus turned to face Peter, his eyes filled with understanding. "Peter, you are looking at the world through the lens of scarcity. But the kingdom of heaven works on a different principle. In this world, when you give, you often find yourself left wanting. But in the kingdom, when you give, you are never empty. Compassion is the water that fills your soul, and it will never run dry if you continue to give it freely." Peter, though still uncertain, felt a flicker of hope in his heart. He had seen Jesus heal the sick, feed the hungry, and show love to those who were forgotten. Maybe, just maybe, this idea of giving without limit could be true. As evening fell and the fire crackled softly in the cool air, Jesus continued. "Look into your own hearts," he said, his voice steady and calm. "Compassion is not just a gift. It is a way of life. It is the very essence of what makes us human. The more you give, the more you will find that your well is filled. It is not in receiving that we are made whole, but in giving." The disciples sat around the fire, the warmth of the flames contrasting with the deep warmth they felt in their hearts. The lesson was clear. Compassion was not just a virtue but a powerful force that could change the world. And in giving it freely, they would find that they too were transformed. The following days brought new challenges. As the disciples continued their journey, they arrived at a village that was suffering from a terrible illness. The villagers were weak, isolated, and fearful, refusing to accept help from strangers. The air was thick with the scent of sickness, and the people seemed to have lost all hope. Jesus, sensing the difficulty of the moment, stopped the group outside the village. "This is a test of your faith," he said. "You must show compassion to these people, even if they do not ask for help. Do not hesitate to offer what you have." The disciples hesitated, feeling the weight of their master's words. The people in this village seemed beyond saving, and their own fears and uncertainties stirred within them. Yet Jesus was firm. "Go, give them water, give them kindness, and you will see that the well of compassion never runs dry." With hearts heavy but determined, the disciples entered the village. They offered the villagers what little they had: food, water, and the warmth of their presence. Slowly, the villagers' faces began to soften. At first, the villagers were wary, but as they saw the disciples' sincerity and the gentle compassion in their eyes, they began to let down their guards. As the days passed, the village began to heal, not just from the physical sickness, but from the isolation and fear that had gripped their hearts. Jesus' disciples had given freely without reservation, and in doing so, they had found that their hearts were filled in ways they had never expected. The well of compassion, just as Jesus had said, never ran dry. The village was slowly restored, its people stronger not just in body but in spirit. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Where once there had been despair, now there was hope. People began to share their resources freely, their hearts open to the idea of helping one another, and the atmosphere in the village was filled with joy and peace. The disciples saw the power of compassion firsthand. It was not the miracles of healing or the material provisions that had restored the village, but the simple acts of kindness and generosity. The more they gave, the more they found their own hearts lightened. Their initial fears had melted away, replaced by a deep, abiding understanding of the truth that Jesus had taught them. Compassion was not something to be hoarded or held back. It was something to be given freely, without expectation. As the disciples spent more time in the village, they began to notice something extraordinary. The more they helped, the more they were filled. It was as though the act of giving itself created a well that continually replenished them. They no longer felt exhausted from their efforts. Instead, they were energized by the joy of helping others. They had become part of something far greater than themselves, a living, breathing example of the kingdom of heaven. Weeks passed, and the disciples began to see the world through a new lens. Everywhere they went, they found opportunities to give, to share, to pour compassion into the lives of others. Whether it was a weary traveler needing food, a family in distress seeking comfort, or a child in need of love, they offered what they had without hesitation. And in turn they were filled, not with material wealth, but with something far more precious: peace, joy, and an unshakable sense of connection to those around them. The teachings of Jesus were no longer just words they heard. They had become the way they lived. The well of compassion within them had become as unending as the one Jesus had shown them. It was as though the more they poured out, the more the water flowed. One day, as they traveled through another village, a man approached them. His face was weathered, his clothes torn, and his eyes filled with the weight of years of suffering. "Will you help me?" he asked, his voice trembling. Without hesitation, the disciples opened their hearts to him, offering him food, water, and shelter. The man, overwhelmed with gratitude, knelt before them, tears streaming down his face. "I have not known kindness in so long," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You have given me more than I ever thought I could receive." The disciples smiled, understanding that in giving, they too had received. Their hearts swelled with a joy they had never known before. The well of compassion had, once again, been replenished. As the journey came to an end and the disciples gathered around the well once more, Jesus spoke to them one final time. The disciples, now transformed by their experiences, sat in a circle, their hearts open and filled with gratitude. Remember this, Jesus said, his voice rich with love and wisdom. The well of compassion never runs dry. The more you give, the more you will be filled. It is not in taking that you find fulfillment, but in giving. The kingdom of heaven is not a place you go to, but a way of life. It is a life lived in service to others, a life that flows with compassion, just as this well flows with water. Jesus' words hung in the air like a gentle breeze, the truth settling deeply in the hearts of his disciples. They understood now, with a clarity that came from lived experience, that compassion was not a fleeting emotion, but a constant wellspring, a gift that could never be exhausted if it was given freely. They stood together, hand in hand, ready to share the living water of compassion with the world. And as they walked away from the well, the sun setting behind them, they knew that their lives would never be the same. They had been shown the greatest truth of all, that in giving they had found not only fulfillment but the deepest kind of joy. And in that joy they had found the kingdom of heaven. And so the disciples went forth, spreading the message that compassion is the well that never dries, the source of eternal life, and the greatest gift they could offer to the world. And in their hearts they carried with them the promise that the more they gave, the more they would be filled forevermore. This concludes The Well That Never Dries, a story of compassion, transformation, and the eternal truth that in giving, we find our deepest fulfillment. This is end of the story. Comment Amen if you believe in Jesus' blessings. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.